Welcome to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires, the show where we talk about finding strength when life falls apart. I'm your host, Melly, and around here, resilience isn't perfection. It's falling flat, getting back up, and maybe laughing about it later. From breakups to breakthroughs, we mix faith, neuroscience, and a little sass to help you rebuild a life that actually feels like yours. Are you ready? Let's go. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Diamonds in Dumpster Fires. I'm your host, Melly, and today we're talking about something that we all face, but we rarely know how to navigate. I'm talking about grief. Grief isn't just about death. It can come after a divorce, a lost friendship, a dream that didn't work out, anytime our lives shift in a way we didn't choose. My guest today is Dr. Audrey Davidheiser, and she brings so much compassion and clarity to this conversation. She's a licensed psychologist, certified internal family systems therapist, and an IFS Institute-approved consultant. After founding a counseling center at the Los Angeles Dream Center, she now helps trauma survivors, including those healing from religious trauma, find peace and wholeness through IFS therapy. Her new book, Grieving Wholeheartedly, is a beautiful guide to honoring every part of your soul in the grieving process. Instead of trying to just get over loss, it teaches us how to listen to what our emotions are trying to say. So whether your heart is freshly broken or is still tender from an old wound, this episode is for you. Dr. Audrey, I am so glad you're here. Before we dive into IFS, I'd love to know, what is something that is bringing you joy right now?
What a wonderful question. I hope this doesn't sound too nerdy, but I just finished an interview and we kind of covered the same question. And I said, my passion, I'm a psychologist, so I love working with people that have emotional pain to begin with. But I also really, really love helping Christians do that because in my experience, some Christians tend to do spiritual bypassing. They tend to spiritualize things. And so that brings me a joy to just be able to work with Christians who are hurting and to help them reach that emotional healing. So that's the nerdy version. But the less nerdy version is I just found a comedian that I really, really love, and his name is Nate Bargatze. Maybe you have found him.
Yes,
Yeah, I know.
love him.
But so I've been watching clips of his, and he's hilarious.
He is. Fun fact, I actually got tickets to a show of his in the LA area. It was like a last minute sort of like, he was on tour and they did this really small show, which he normally was like selling out these big amphitheaters. My friend and I went and we actually got in the front row of this like little theater where he did the show. It was so much fun.
Wow. Was it funny?
Oh, yes. He is my absolute favorite comedian. So, yeah, he's hilarious. Yeah. Definitely see him live if you can. So awesome. So now diving into a little bit about internal family systems, or as you call it in the book, IFS, I really was impressed with how you introduced that topic in such an approachable way. And for those listening who might not have heard of it before, which was me before I read your book as well, can you give us a quick introduction into what IFS is?
Yes. So if any of your listeners have watched the movie by Pixar, Inside Out, came out some years ago, and then there's a sequel last summer. That movie is basically based on IFS. The idea being, just like we have family members on the outside, we have internal family members, so to speak. They're parts of our soul. So that's why if I'm angry, my husband would tell you she's not herself. She's very, very angry right now. Or if we're at work, then we're driven. We're goal-oriented. Or if we're playing with our children or our nephews and nieces, we can giggle and laugh and be joyful. Those are different versions of us, which is completely normal. That's the one thing that we have learned in psychology before, meaning in the olden days. We thought that if someone has so-called multiple personality, that means they're sick. That's why there's multiple personality disorder, or now it's more commonly known as dissociative identity disorder. But now we realize that's not completely true because, just watch how we say it. A part of me wants to go out this weekend. Another part feels like I'm really tired. I just want to rest. So we already speak like we have multiple parts in us, right? So now the job is to just kind of normalize it and say, okay, you're not crazy. It doesn't mean that, again, you have DID if you say, A part of me wants this, a part of me wants that. And the job of an internal family systems therapist like myself is to help the parts that are burdened, whatever the burden may be. In this case, we're talking about grief, but to help that part connect with ourselves because the healing comes from ourselves, the real us.
Interesting. Yeah, it was very interesting, and I love how you tie it into that Pixar movie because, yeah, for anyone who has seen that, just kind of recognizing that we do have all those little parts. How can understanding these different parts actually help us to extend compassion toward ourselves in those moments where maybe we're feeling angry or not wanting to go to something we signed up for instead of judging ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's understanding that our parts always mean good things for us. They mean the best for us, but sometimes they're pressed. Because if you think about it, well, I shouldn't say this is a global truth, but most of our parts are younger than us. So consider like teenagers or little kids. They mean well, but they don't really know any better. So that's why their strategies in coping sometimes don't really help, especially if we're now adults. And so, whatever the scenario might be, if maybe we lost our temper and we lashed out at a family member, instead of then kicking ourselves and say, you're really impatient, or why haven't you grown yet? Maybe just be curious, look inside and ask, okay, the part of me that lost my temper, could I just ask you what happened right before you lost your temper? And if you approach that part with a curious mind and an open heart, usually there would be a scenario or a story that unfolds like, well, because my family member looks at me with that sneer, and I just knew that in the past that sneer always preceded something scornful, and I didn't want to hear the scorn. Yes, fine, I haven't found a job, I don't need to hear it from this family member again, so I thought I'm just gonna proactively preempt that by lashing out. So that's a fictitious story I just created, but the point being, if we are curious and we approach the parts of us that we might think to be troublemakers, they have a story to tell. There's a perspective to the story that we may not have known if we didn't spend the time and be genuinely curious and kind hearted toward that part that just flashed out or lost their patience or cried in public or do something that makes us go, no, that's so embarrassing.
Yeah, interesting. And I remember from the book, you talk a bit about how our parts can actually use our bodies to communicate. So, for example, if someone notices their heart is racing or they feel lightheaded because, they haven't heard from somebody, or all of these different ways that our body kind of clues us in, how could someone use those physical sensations to learn more about those parts rather than, trying to push them away?
Yeah. So number one, I just want to say it's very natural to want to push these sensations or the thoughts away. That's like everybody knows how to do that. That's very easy.
Yeah.
So if you do that, the next time you do that, that's okay. But then pause and say, okay, hold on, hold on. I just heard this podcast and she's talking about how there's a different way. I don't have to push away the sensations. Let me just kind of slow down a little bit. It always helps to take deep breaths. Just like the God given way to kind of reset our nervous system. So go ahead and take a few deep breaths from your stomach, not from your chest. Keep taking deep breaths until you feel a little calmer. Okay. So once the calm returns, that's when you go back and say, okay, what was that again? Oh, right. My heart was racing. Well, that's curious. Why was my heart racing? Then just aim your question to your heart. Now, this is where it might take a learning curve because if I say, just ask your heart, why were you racing? Some people might go, well, that's funny. You're talking to yourself like that? What, are you crazy? So that's the learning curve. And I want to say, no, believe it or not, it's not just crazy people that talk to themselves. Normal, healthy people also talk to themselves, right? Because like if you go out your house and you're like, oh, where's my keys? Who's that, right? You're asking yourself, where did I leave my keys? So it's fine. It's okay talking to your parts the way I see it. It's fine asking your heart, why were you racing, or the palms of your hands. You're very cold right now. What's going on? Obviously, you don't have to ask it out loud. No, that's not a requirement, but you can ask it inside, internally, kind of aim the question to the body, like what you said before, the sensation that you're feeling, whether your stomach, your toes, whatever it may be. And when you ask the question, just kind of leave it be. Don't try to come up with the answer. Just let that answer come just organically. from whichever part that you're asking that question to.
Okay. So you just ask it, whether you say it out loud or in your head, and then you just kind of let it be. So if, because I know for like a lot of us who come from more of like a faith-based background, we're used to maybe trying to pray away things like that. Like, oh, my stomach
Right,
is like fluttering. I'm
right.
just going to pray it away. So what would you say to the faith-based person who's like, oh, I'm just going to pray it away rather than ask that question?
I would say you can do both. So, Lord, my stomach is hurting. Would you please heal it? That's a prayer. But then let's say you pray and the flutter is still there and you're still feeling sick to your stomach. There could be a part there. So after the prayer, go ahead and be curious and ask your stomach, what's happening? Can I help you? This is how I would do it with my clients. I would ask my clients to ask their stomach, could you please translate this into English or whatever the language that you speak is, so that I understand what you need from me. Because if you're just giving me pain symptoms, I don't really know what's going on. But if you translate it into English, then you're letting me know. Like, for instance, maybe the flutter is there because this person's really nervous. The next day, there's going to be like this huge presentation at work. It's like make it or break it. Maybe it's that's causing the flutter or something else that I don't know. But the point is the same. You can pray about it, but you can also talk to that part, because you're right. Our parts use all kinds of ways to get our attention, including pain. Maybe for this particular person, their parts have tried to talk to them and give them dreams and give them feelings. But again, sometimes in the faith community, feelings are overridden. Feelings are thought of as an enemy. So don't believe your feelings. They lie to you. And so our parts have tried these different venues, but they're all shut down, thinking, oh no, that's the enemy, or I shouldn't really be thinking these ways anyway. And so if they don't have any other way to get our attention, sometimes they think, oh, well, I'm just going to put pain on you. Because usually, for most of us anyway, when our body is in pain, that's where we get concerned, right? That's where we kind of just pour our attention and say, okay, my stomach is hurting. I got to do something about this. And so because of that, sometimes parts do use our body to communicate with us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And another kind of tie into that I read about in your book, and I was like, whoa, this is really interesting, is where you talk about dreams. You say in the book, soul level dreams happen when parts direct the screenplay. And I was like, ooh, I love that. I wrote that down. I highlighted it. Can you kind of unpack that for listeners a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm just going to do an illustration from someone that I work with, but of course I'm going to anonymize this individual. But this person hears from their parts in their dreams, to where they would like wake up gasping because it's a nightmare. So
Yeah.
after this happens again and again, I prompted this client to say to their parts, listen, if you need to talk to me, you don't need to give me a nightmare. In fact, please don't give me a nightmare, because if you talk to me in the daytime, for instance, when I'm not at work, then I can actually help you with whatever it is that you're struggling with. So after we did that, here the person was, came back to therapy and said, well, this time my dream was very gentle. I dream about that issue that this client and I have been working on. So the issue was still there, but the dream was gentle. It wasn't jarring, was a nightmare kind of dream. And so we processed it in, okay, which part of you flashed that dream? So this client asked their internal system. One part said, actually three parts said, it was us. Okay,
Hmm.
well, why did you do that? And so we processed that. But that's what I mean, that depending on your system, maybe your parts don't really deal with dreams. I don't think dreams are necessary. But for other people that are really busy all the time, or they have protector parts that are effective in kind of banishing thoughts of grief, of loss, of trauma. And because the protector parts are so successful at it, the parts that are hurting, the ones that are holding on grief and the memory of the lost one, those parts don't have any other venue until the person goes to sleep. Because when you go to sleep, your defenses are lower. And that's when these parts feel like, aha, finally got my moment to shine here. I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm going to give you a dream to tell you I'm still hurting over this, even if during your daytime, protector parts act like, no, 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 that's a thing in the past. That's been years. I lost my mom or my dad or my sweetheart or my child years ago, and I'm fine now. But that's during the daytime. During the nighttime, other parts that are still hurting say, oh no, we're still hurting.
That's really interesting. And would you say that that also applies for grief from maybe not losing someone through death, but maybe through a traumatic divorce or the end of a relationship?
For sure, for sure. And here's the key, especially if the loss has been denied, that seems to be the determining factor. If the traumatic breakup or whatever the context is of that relationship, if that hasn't been fully processed, then that creates the dynamic that I described before. That this person might convey this perception of everything's fine, my life is put back together. That breakup, oh no, that was years ago. I've moved on. So that's kind of like the image that they convey out there. But if the trauma has never been processed, then I'm willing to bet that there are exiles or parts that are hurting, vulnerable parts that might still be thinking about, what did I do wrong? Why did my fiance left me? Or why did my spouse leave? Was it me? Or the opposite. Again, talking about faith community, sometimes anger is really looked down on. And so maybe there's parts that are really angry that the divorce happened, but the anger has been banished because we're not supposed to be angry. So then again, that could create this dynamic of, well, then I'm just going to create the angry part or the part that has been banished. Might unconsciously say, well, then I'm going to give you a dream or a nightmare to show you that I'm still here and I'm still hurting over that traumatic breakup.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And this is hitting me personally because, I got divorced. It's been about 4 years now.
Mm.
And my story is that my ex and I divorced. Once he decided he wanted to divorce me, I never actually got to see him again. We were married 14 years. He did everything by
Oh.
text message, a couple phone calls and email, but I never actually saw his face again.
Oh.
And forever, I kind of just, I moved forward. I went to therapy. I've done like all the things, and I feel that I have done a lot of healing. But lately, just in the last like year, I have been having the craziest dreams about him, and it's all trying to figure things out, and I'm like trying to find him down these really convoluted
Mm.
hallways and chasing him into different rooms and like trying to stop him. And I'm like hearing all this, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I see what the problem is now. Because it's been so many years, it kind of confused me as to why I would suddenly have dreams about my ex. But in hearing you talk about this, it does make a lot of sense that perhaps I did sort of push that down, and I am one of the busiest people, so
Mhm.
maybe through that, those parts of mine are saying, "Hey, okay, we're gonna get your attention now."
Well, can I also offer another scenario though? It is possible that your dreams or the nightmares happen after a day where maybe something triggered your memory of your ex, or something triggered you to where a part inside kept wondering again, what did I do? Did I not reach out enough? And all the feelings that surrounded a trigger. So it could be that as well. It's not necessarily, maybe I pushed this thing down. Maybe it was that, but maybe it could also be, yeah, a trigger, because depending on the value of the person or the thing that we lost, that's how long we can expect to grieve. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that all of us are grieving, because we have different parts and parts heal at different rates. So parts that are more like thinking parts, they probably don't cry as much as parts that were missing this person, whatever the context again is. So all that to say, I would be curious, like maybe the next day, if I remember the dream, I would just kind of ask, similar to how I explain, I work with my client. Okay, so which parts of me gave me that dream of trying to find my ex and couldn't reach him? Um, and just wait for the answer, see if there's like a voice inside saying it's me, or I'm a visual person. So when I work with my system, I usually see my parts. Not hallucination kind of seeing, but more like in my mind's eye. And so, yeah, I just wait. Okay, who were the parts of me that gave me that dream? And come at it with a curious heart, not like, oh, I'm so angry that I'm not over, and it's not that, right? So
Right.
then after you sense an answer like, oh, okay, it could be this part, then you just kind of sit down like with a friend and just ask, how can I help you with your grief, especially? And then you just check it out, what the part says, and if the part, whatever the part needs, if you feel like I can do that for you, then say so. But if not, don't say anything that you can't follow through, because it's important for trust building with our part. Just ask, if you and I agree, hey, let's meet at a coffee shop at 3 o'clock. next Wednesday, and then I don't show up, you wouldn't like that, right? Same
Right.
thing with parts. If we say to our parts, say you have this conversation with your part, and your part says, "What? You know what? I just need you to give me more time. I really want to talk to you about this traumatic divorce that happened." And if I say, "Okay, sure, I'll meet with you this weekend. I'll give you 30 minutes." But if I don't give this part 30 minutes this weekend, then that part has the right to be angry. The next time I dream again or you dream again, and then you talk to that part again, say, "Oh, were you the one that caused me to dream last night?" "Yep, that was me." Be prepared to know that that part is probably a little bit upset because the last time I said, "I'm going to meet with you 30 minutes this weekend," I didn't keep that promise. So just treat your parts like you would a good friend or a child, love on your parts. When you say you're going to do it, do it. And you say you can't do it, be honest and just say, "I can't. I'm so sorry. 30 minutes is too long. Can I start with 10 though? Can we do 10 minutes this weekend?" And go from there.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that'll be really enlightening. Now, one thing that I really loved was how you would draw parallels in the book between IFS and, say, like inner healing ministry or prayer. As someone who is really interested in the intersection of faith and neuroscience, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast, I was really appreciative of seeing that overlap. I'd love to know, have you found that that idea meets resistance in faith communities?
I would say it depends on the church and the denomination. But again, I guess that would be my best answer, depending on the church or the denomination. But generally speaking, the church, that's my experience, I should own that. The church doesn't seem to be as open to dealing with mental health issues. Whereas if it's couched in, it's inner healing, then for some reason it's more acceptable. But if it's therapy, then it's therapy. It's secular. It's psychology. Therefore, no. So that's in my experience anyway.
Yeah, and I've had a similar experience, even just on Instagram, for example, where I will share something about the science behind why our bodies need rest. And then I'll also share from a faith based perspective. And I will get messages, angry messages from people saying, "Oh, you shouldn't compare science with faith. And
Hmm.
God's all you need. Put away your science books." And like, it's like, okay,
Right.
this is crazy. So yeah, I was just curious if you had that same reaction sometimes. And of course, I have
Yeah.
a lot of people who are all about the intersection of those things, but it does, I think, depend on the denomination and the community that you're sharing it in for sure.
Mm.
Now, when it comes to the timeline of grief, I think there's a lot of confusion there for a lot of people. They kind of expect, they've all heard the stages of grief and thinking, okay, I'm going to go from step 1 to step 2. And you remind readers not to pin their hopes on resolving grief within a certain amount of time, which is very freeing, but it also might make some people uncomfortable who are, very goal oriented and want a clear endpoint. Can you share a little insight into what that process looks like when we stop trying to rush healing to a certain deadline we might have created for ourselves?
Yeah, I love the way you put it because it is so true. If again, back to the analogy of if you have a little child and he just skinned his knee, can you really help his knee heal faster if you yell at him, say, "Hurry up. It's been 3 months. What have you been doing with your time?" Right? It's not
Yeah.
going to help the knee skin. Well, actually, it's going to make it worse. So the same goes with our heart. The reason you're grieving is because the person you lost or the job that you didn't get, or in my case, I live in Southern California, there were crazy fires earlier this year to where people's homes burned down and their whole entire neighborhood just kind of was wiped down. How can you put a time limit to grieving that magnitude of loss? How can you say, "Oh, it's been a year. I should be over it by now"? Particularly if there were prior losses before this current one. And I think you said in your intro, which I totally agree, we don't always know what to do with grief. So we just kind of like put it away from our minds, right? We don't think about it. We just kind of like hope that time is going to heal away wounds. But if there are prior losses that we haven't dealt with, and now here comes the next one, the current one, then to say, well, this first step of grief, I should be over it by now, says who? If it's true that we have many parts, and it is true, then yeah, maybe there are some parts of you that are over it, but it doesn't mean that the other parts, the ones that were more attached to that person or to the house or to the pet, whatever it is, doesn't mean that the other parts are not still in need of your love and attention and compassion. Again, if you can just think of your soul as a community of different age parts. Some parts of you are really, really young, and other parts are a little bit older, but they're still teenagers or young adults. And grief is hard because of the value of the thing or the animal that you lost. To stranger, I mean, strangers die every day in the world. Well, we don't know about it. We don't care because they're strangers to us. The reason we're grieving, like I said, is because that person or thing meant a lot to us. And so, isn't it just honoring to give our parts all the time they need because of the value of the thing or the person that we lost? Isn't that the least? I mean, it's not so much for their sake too. It's for our sake, for the sake of the parts that are left behind, with the question marks like, why did my dad die so soon? Or in your case, I don't know why it happened. Why did my divorce happen the way it did? And those parts deserve our attention. And even if we don't have the answer, just to know that there's someone else that is sitting with our agony, that really helps. That's why this concept of we have a self, that's our real identity. IFS helps that concept of me, myself, standing or sitting with the part of me that is grieving. That's really helpful, at least for me.
Yeah, that is very helpful. Now, in looking at our religious parts, I found it really interesting when you were talking about we actually have these religious parts who will tell us things based on our religion. And it reminded me of a woman that I used to go to church with years and years ago who was in the middle of a divorce herself. And she felt like people were, what she put it, beating her with the Bible by quoting
Mm,
verses to her instead of listening to her pain. She
mm.
would come in for help and this is what she would get. Is that the kind of thing our religious parts do?
Yes, that would be an excellent example. And they might mean well, but as you could ask that woman, I'm sure she'll say, no, that wasn't helpful at all. Right.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what religious parts do. They can be very insistent, and they love quoting a holy book, scripture, or some other holy book, and they love quoting authority figures as well, like pastors, ministers, obviously God. So if you can, if you're facing your own religious part or somebody else's religious part, kind of just like pause and hopefully again remember this episode and say to yourself, okay, there's a religious part here somewhere. So let me just be patient, because you can't win an argument with the religious part. It's just impossible. They're going to be more persistent. They're going to dig in their heels, and they're going to quote 30 more scriptures to tell you why you're wrong. Yeah. So you can't win that argument by being insistent.
Interesting. Okay. I've experienced that even when I was in a small group when I was in the middle of my divorce and was sharing with the group. It was really difficult for me. I waited a really long time before sharing
Mm.
with the group what I was going through. And one of the guys in the group, as soon as I was done sharing, I have tears in my eyes, and he just blurts out, God hates divorce.
Oh my word. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was his religious
Wow.
part coming to the
Yes.
party, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, wow. That makes my angry part just really angry. I'm so sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, it was interesting to say the least.
Mm.
Now, in IFS, there are also terms like protectors and exiles. And I know for some listeners that might sound a little bit abstract at first. Could you give us a
Mhm.
real life example of what a protector and an exile might look like in someone's inner world?
Yeah. Let me see if I can come up with a good example. Okay, yeah. So let's say someone grew up with a chaotic childhood. Maybe mom and dad split up when this girl was like, I don't know, 6, 7. And so, as a child, it is perfectly normal for children to think these things happen because of me, because they're
Mm.
self-centered. But that's perfectly fine. That's developmentally appropriate. So let's just say this girl grows up with that belief that I must have done something, and because that's why dad left. Okay, so there's an exile there that believes this was my mistake, or I feel ashamed because my dad left, and ever since that happened, life has never been the same. But it's hard to survive in this world with feeling shame all the time or feeling rejected all the time. So therefore, there are protective parts that step in and wanted to shield the exile, the feeling of embarrassment or rejection or shame. And how do they protect this exile? Well, by a couple ways. The first way is to be proactive. So these are our manager parts, like the name implies, they manage. And particularly, they manage our emotions. So a manager part might make us go to bed early so that we can get up in the morning and we don't miss our alarm clock, and we go to work and we get the paycheck because obviously we need money so that we can keep living. That would be one manager. Another type of protector would be firefighter. And like the actual firefighters in the external world, firefighter parts put out emotional flames. That's a difference. Okay, so what are the emotional flames? Well, it would be triggers and reminders, like in the case of what I just presented. Let's say this girl grows up to be a businesswoman, and yet, let's say she's doing a meeting, and then somebody else says something that triggers the sense of not good enough or shame because dad left. If her exile was triggered to where she starts feeling, her talking about neuroscience, her body feels the flush of shame, and she's taken over by the feeling of, who do I think I am that I can run a business like this? I don't even have a dad growing up. I'm so ashamed. Look at all these people in this meeting. They all have degrees, and they have multi-million dollar companies behind their names. And who am I to think that I can compete with them? So shame overtakes this individual. So she runs away from the meeting, cuts it short, and goes home and maybe buys a gallon of ice cream on the way home and just eats it all in one sitting. That would be a firefighter that is trying to soothe the pain, the embarrassment, the shame, feeling like I'm not worthy to run a business and have a meeting with other business owners. But the firefighter is the one that says, okay, we'll just buy ice cream then. Just eat something sweet and forget about all that shame. I don't want you to think that. So just eat something sweet so that I soothe the pain of the shame. Is this making sense?
Yeah, that does. Thank you. Yeah, that's a really great example.
Right.
Now, I want to talk about in the book you mention a do-over step where you describe something that maybe can actually be used to help rewire the nervous system. And this actually fascinated me again with all the, neuroscience stuff we talk about here on the podcast, neuroplasticity and rewiring. Can you explain what happens in the brain when we do that do-over revisiting of a memory?
Yeah. So in a funny way, whether something happened in the external world or not, if we do it over, the brain acts like it happened. So it's almost like the timestamp doesn't matter for the brain. But the act of doing it over like overrides the fact that there's a deficit in the past, particularly because the act of doing it over is done with what I said before, your real identity, yourself. Because one reason trauma is because when something bad happened, we felt overwhelmed, we felt alone, we felt like nobody else understood or was there for us. One of the downfalls of your typical talk therapy is the recounting of the trauma is actually reliving the pain, which is not helpful. But doing over is not reliving the pain because it's yourself that's doing it over with the part that was hurt. So if yourself is there, present with the part that was traumatized or hurt, the act of doing it over is now recorded in the brain as that's the valid version. No longer will the brain go back to, oh, but dad left. Again, going back to my fictitious example, but dad left when I was young, and that means I'm worthless. If this person's self is there to do it over, the person's self could say to the part, no, honey, your dad didn't leave because you were worthless. Your dad left because he was an alcoholic. And mom couldn't stand him jeopardizing your safety anymore. That's why she said to your dad, okay, if you want to keep drinking, you got to leave. And he left. But it wasn't because you're worthless. It's because he couldn't get a hold of his own parts that were addicted to alcohol. So let's say the self of this person says that to the part that's hurt. Then the part starts taking in a new perspective. And the do-over could be when dad first left and this part was like crying, herself could be there and say, I'm so sorry your dad left. But guess what? I'm yourself and I will never leave you. And that could be really, really helpful for this young part to know, okay, so there's someone here that will never leave me. And again, like I said, that act of even just doing it over is now stamped in our brain as, okay, that's the valid version. Even though dad did leave, I did feel alone, but because I did do it over with myself, now I feel not alone anymore because apparently somebody else understands the pain that I went through.
Okay, interesting. And would that also be a step you could do? Like, say your last conversation with somebody who unexpectedly passed was a negative conversation, and you can't stop replaying that in your head, that that's the last memory that you have with that person. Can you use this do-over step to help heal that as well?
Oh, for sure. Yes, majorly. Yeah, I would do the same concept, and I would ask the part that felt. And I'm not gonna assume. So let's just gonna take it step by step. Ask that part. Okay, were you the one that said those harsh things to this person? Yes, I was. All right. Well, if you could do it over, what would you like to say instead? So I'm gonna ask that part what the part wants. And so once the part says, well, I'd rather say something like, I'm sorry things aren't working out, but is this really necessary? Do we really have to separate? I really want to ask that. Okay. But maybe if I do it with somebody else, another client, and I ask the client to ask that part, were you the one that said the harsh things? Yes, I was. Okay. Well, if you could do it over, what would you say instead? I would say, I'm sorry. I would say that it was just a heat of the moment and I should not have said those nasty things. Okay, we could do it over that way as well. So in other words, I really give the part that felt guilty or felt I shouldn't say that or I should have said something else. I give that part a lot of understanding and I encourage my client, if I'm working with a client, to do that with the part that they're working with and a lot of compassion, a lot of love, and then ask if you could do it over, what would you say instead? And then we just go from there.
When it comes to grieving, I want to talk a little bit about loneliness because I know so many listeners, especially those that have been through divorce or other trauma, they wrestle deeply with loneliness. And in the book, you mentioned a meta analysis that found that loneliness is actually more dangerous than alcohol abuse and carries a 45% higher risk of early death, which is staggering. How can we, as you suggest in the book, begin to turn inward first when everything in us just wants to reach outward for distraction or maybe a false sense of connection from the loneliness?
Yeah, I would say those are two different trailheads, what we call trailheads, but strategies basically to cope with loneliness. So if there's a push to look outward, let's find a friend to talk to. Let's, make a plans for this weekend so that I don't feel so lonely. So there's a part there that wants to do it that way. And I'll gently sit with that part, say, hey, can I just have a chat with you? Sure, what's up? And I would say something like, I know you want me to reach out and I will really, but can I just ask you too that note that we can't control other people. If I go out with someone because I'm lonely and I'm hoping that my coffee date with a friend would cure all my loneliness, I'm putting a lot of pressure on that meeting so that this person can help me feel less lonely. And that's hard on anybody. And if that expectation isn't met, I might feel disgruntled. It might even tamper with my friendship. So that's a risk I'm not willing to take. Now, for that reason, would you mind allowing me to work with the lonely part of me first? Because I could be a friend to that lonely part. We could go to coffee shop together, me and the lonely part. Then I can hear from the lonely part, okay, tell me all about your loneliness. And I could be a friend, really. I'm not going to be judgmental. I'm not going to criticize. I'm just going to listen like a good friend would. Would you let me do that? So I'm going to negotiate access to the part of me that wants to go out and have fun and always look for other people to cure my loneliness. I think there's the second part there that I didn't mention. What was your second example? If somebody's lonely, they wanted to do what? What was the second example?
Maybe, filling their time with tons of appointments, maybe just to distract from the fact that they're not feeling that connection with others.
Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, so it's a similar, basically just sitting down with a part that wants to distract me and fill my calendar with all kinds of appointments and gently ask. Again, not this is really the key. Don't be cheeky about it. Don't be like smart aleck about it. No, really ask the part. Do you find that doing this really help you? Because I've been busy, right? I've been filling my week with to do this, to do that, activities, tasks. But do you really find that that's helpful? Now, if the part is honest, I think the part would say something like, "Well, no, but I'd rather keep you busy than let you go down this spiral of I'm so lonely because nobody wants me because my dad left when I was young and so on." That's when you go, okay, I get it. Thank you for trying to help me curb my loneliness. But that's not how you do it. Not by distracting me with a million things on my to-do list, because at the end of the day, the lonely part is still lonely. And
Right.
like the meta study that you cited, it could actually lead to some fatalities like, I can't take this anymore. Nobody wants to be around me. I'm just going to end it. So would you please let me not get to that stage at all? Would you let me be with a part of me that is lonely? And then again, if this protector part is honest, they might say something like, I don't know though, if I let you do that, you might be depressed. You might be even more suicidal. You might, and then insert the fear basically of what would happen if I'm allowed to sit with my loneliness. Then you can say something like, well, I'll ask my part not to overwhelm me. Or maybe I'll ask my part to show me like one teaspoonful of loneliness at a time instead of all at once, just a little bit at a time so that I'm not going to be overwhelmed and I can still be a resource to that part. Would you let me do that? And sometimes what is helpful is to also tell a protector part, let's just set the alarm clock for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that's how long I'll spend with the lonely part. At the end of the 10 or 15 minutes, I'll say goodbye to the lonely part. And then you can gauge because our parts know us and they can gauge whether we feel less lonely, whether we feel a little bit more cheerful or not. Honestly, if somebody has been traumatized and they have had a lot of losses, I do recommend seeing a therapist because doing this work alone can be pretty hard to do as well.
Yes, definitely. And that was actually going to be my next question to you is when is it time to seek professional help?
Definitely, if there are multiple losses, especially if this person is aware that he or she has not really been grieving the prior losses. If the losses are violent, I would include in that suicide. Homicide definitely is violent. If it seems like all the coping mechanisms that this person has relied on aren't really doing it anymore, and they start going down the more destructive road, like cutting or drinking nonstop, then definitely consider hiring a professional therapist. And if there's just like an urge, honestly, it doesn't have to be any of this. If there's an urge on the inside, like, I think I need help, honor that urge, because there's really no stigma. If you have a toothache and you call a dentist, I'm not going to shame you. It's fine. You can call your dentist. Same thing. If there's like a voice or a need or a yearning inside, I think I need help, then do it. Call a therapist because there's no shame in asking for help. We need each other's help all the time. That's how God built us. I'm a Christian, so that's how my worldview is, that we are relational for a reason. Imagine if one person can fulfill everybody else's needs. I mean, that person's going to be like a dictator like overnight, right? Because,
Right.
they get all the power, but that's just not how the world functions. So it's okay to reach out for help.
Yes, I love that. It's absolutely okay and encouraged to reach out for help. This has been such a rich and healing conversation, Dr. Audrey. I really love how your work gives people permission to grieve without shame, to integrate both mental health tools with faith, and to approach healing as something that's more relational and not just emotional. Before we wrap up, I'd love to know, is there one truth or encouragement that you would want listeners to hold on to as they walk through their own season of grief?
Yes. If you work on your grief, at some point, those parts are not going to be as burdened. So what I'm saying is that this isn't like a never-ending cycle that you can't get out of. No, there's an exit. And just as I still grieve my dad's death? Absolutely. He meant and still means a lot to me. But it's been 7 years. I've worked on my parts. The ones that were grieving so bad now are grieving, but not as bad. Does that make sense? So there is an exit. This isn't a cycle that goes on and on ad nauseum. That is just not the truth. The truth is, if you work, you befriend your parts, even the most traumatic loss too, there's hope for those parts, and you don't have to be feeling miserable all the time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now, friends, if this episode spoke to you, I really want to highly encourage you to pick up a copy of Dr. Audrey's book, Grieving Wholeheartedly. It's thoughtful, it's grounded, and it is full of grace. You will find links to the book, her website, and other resources in the show notes today. Dr. Audrey, thank you so much for being here today. I just really appreciate you taking the time to speak to my listeners and to help them through their seasons of grief.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Melly. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Diamonds and Dumpster Fires. If today reminded you that resilience is a practice, not a personality trait, you're in the right place. Keep showing up, keep rebuilding, and don't forget, even diamonds start as pressure and mess. For more faith-filled encouragement and real-life tools to help you heal and grow, check out the show notes for some free resources and ways to stay connected. See you next time.